long awaited, precious promise, Son of God and Son of Man. Heaven's glory in a manger has come to us in Bethlehem. Oh, Messiah, Messiah, a baby born to save us all. Messiah, Messiah, on our knees we fall. All we long for, all we needed, shining in a child's eyes. Hope forever, death defeated, because of this one holy night. Messiah, Messiah, a baby born to save us all. Messiah, Messiah, on our knees we fall. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Christ the Lord. Long awaited, precious promise, coming back again. Messiah, Messiah, a baby born to save us all. Messiah, Messiah, on our knees we fall. On our knees we fall. Love incarnate, love divine, star and angels gave the sign. Bow to babe on bended knee, the Savior of humanity. Unto us a child is born, He shall reign forevermore.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Especially, I want to say Merry Christmas to the many folks that we have not seen for some time. We miss you. We look forward to the day when you are able to come back to church. That day, in and of itself, will feel like Christmas. I especially want to say thank you to the praise team. You have seen their creativity and already heard some of their wonderful music in the video already. I want to thank them for their hard work while Jill and I have been home quarantining. And I also want to thank her for putting this video together tonight for all of us to be blessed and to share it with others. I encourage you to do that on Facebook. I have a few notes here that you'll see me look down at. I want to make sure that I'm able to share everything that I'd like to say to you tonight on this blessed holy night. But first, I also want to pause to remember the folks who have lost loved ones, not only to COVID-19, but folks who have lost loved ones for any reason. And maybe it's not this year, maybe it was a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, maybe it was 10 or 25 years ago. But we know that those losses make this time of the year a very difficult year for some. And so we simply say at the beginning of this, and it's a prayer, just a simple prayer. Lord, be with them. Amen. So church, you only have to look out the window over my shoulder to see the rain that's been here all day, to see the snow melting, and to say what a mess it is today. And it certainly is. It is a mess. And for most of us, I want to say it's a mess tonight because you're watching me here in my home at the parsonage. We're not at church on Christmas Eve. I've already heard many people say it, and maybe it's true to some extent. COVID-19, this virus, has really made a mess of Christmas. It's certainly far less than what we had hoped for. So we're talking to you tonight. I'm talking to you tonight because this past Tuesday, Jill and I were exposed to the virus. This Saturday we'll be tested, but we were in the presence of someone who the very next day tested positive for COVID-19. And so we followed all the protocols, and that's the reason we're not able to meet together tonight. Again, maybe we would say that COVID sure has made a mess of Christmas. And it reminds me of just a very simple quote of one of my favorite, one of my favorite authors. Her name is Nadia Bolz-Weber. She's also a pastor. And one time Nadia Bolz-Weber said, and she wrote, that sometimes newness can be messy. I'd like you to think about that just for a moment. Newness can be messy. Because, I really believe she's right. And at Christmas, while the whole world slept and barely noticed, God was doing something new that would change the world forever in this baby that was born to Joseph and Mary, and they would give him the name Jesus. God was doing something new. It was 700 years before his birth that the prophet Isaiah spoke these words. You'll find them in Isaiah 43, verses 18 and 19. There the prophet says, "Forget the former things and don't dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness, in streams in the wasteland." Those are good words. And I really like that the prophet says, do not dwell in the past. Because if we're honest, sometimes we know all too well that our pasts can be pretty messy. And even when we'd like to forget about our past, sometimes we have those other people there that are never going to let us forget just how messy our lives may have been at one time. And maybe we don't even need those other people. Maybe for us, we remind ourselves each and every day of the mistakes that we made, and reminding ourselves and living in the past, and it just becomes very difficult to ever move forward into the future that God has for us. This newness that the prophet Isaiah said that God has for us. Church, I know lives can be messy because relationships are, finances are, family is messy. Yes, our past is messy. Maybe it's our present that's messy. How many times have we said during these difficult months, I just wish things could go back to the way that they used to be? Because today seems like it is so difficult and messy. And the prophet says, no matter what's happening in life, behold, out of the mess, God is going to do something new. And that was the birth of Jesus. I mean, if we're honest, even the Christmas story was a mess, right? The night that God became flesh and came into the world. There was this census, and Joseph and Mary suddenly found themselves having to travel to Bethlehem in that ancient world, 9 months pregnant, traveling through the night on a donkey, only to find out in Bethlehem that all the rooms had already been taken. There was no place for them to stay. And they found themselves in a stable, surrounded by animals, perhaps, in a lowly manger that normally would be filled for hay for animals to eat, would soon be filled with this child, this baby. It would soon be holding the King of Kings. But really, what a mess that night must have been. And I really want you to hear this part. Please don't miss it. Maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Maybe that's God's point. Maybe this God of ours is the God who says to us from the very beginning, I am home with you right here, right now, in your life, no matter how messy it may be. I'm with you. I'm the God who is at home in your life and in the messiness of life. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's sickness. Maybe it's this virus. Maybe it's divorce. I mean, the list of how life can become so messy and complicated and difficult is really endless. But in the midst of this is this God who the prophet Isaiah says, if you will only look, he is making a way in the wilderness, streams in the wasteland. This God is doing something new. And it's happening all the time. Do you see it? I mean, those aren't my words. Those are the prophet Isaiah's words. So I told you about Tuesday. Let me tell you, Tuesday was a mess. Let me tell you about it. So on Tuesday, Jill was at work and I had to drive our daughters, Kirsten and Kaylee, to be tested for COVID-19. And as we drove to the testing site, all they could talk about is how much they did not want to take this test. I mean, you've heard about it. It's a cotton swab on a stick about that long that goes about 8 inches up our nostril. Not really, but you know what I mean. It's not pleasant, to say the least. And when you're a teenage girl, it can get pretty messy. And so Kirsten's the oldest, and maybe she's the bravest. And as we got to the site, she would go first, and she was sitting in the front seat next to me, and Kaylee was watching her older sister from the back seat. And as the nurse administered the test, Kirsten moaned and she groaned and she wiggled and she squiggled. Had to get some Dr. Seuss in there. It was not pleasant to watch. The 5 seconds took forever. And then it was Kaylee's turn. And listen, when it was Kaylee's turn in the back seat, folks, it wasn't just a mess. Everything was falling apart there in the back seat. Sometimes life is like that. It's not just messy. It just simply falls apart. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw these tears streaming down her face, and she was pleading, please, no, I don't want this test. And in the next breath, she knew she had to take the test, and she said, okay. And she was just in agony. And like I said, it was all falling apart. And that's when I heard Kirsten say, Kaylee, I'm going to come back there with you. I'm going to sit next to you, and you're going to hold my hand, and you can squeeze my hand the entire time through this test. And she opened the door and she crawled into the back seat beside her sister, and she got up next to her, and I could see Kaylee squeezing her hand. And at one point in the rearview mirror, I looked, and Kirsten had her in a headlock, all out of love, I'm sure, just to get her through this. Because sometimes it's just hard to get through. And right there in the midst of this scene, I was reminded of Christmas. Because just as Kirsten left the front seat to be with her sister, on this night, we tell the story. God left heaven to be close to us, to be as near as God could get to us. And this baby named Jesus, also that this Jesus could one day grow up and say to you and say to me and say to the world, I'm here with you now. Take my hand. You're not alone in this anymore. I'm here. And in order to get us through this, in order to get us where we need to be, maybe in order to get you where you need to be, well, it may get a little messy, because newness can be like that. I'm God, Jesus said. I'm at home in your mess. You don't have to hide it. I love you just the way you are. And hear the good news, church. At the end of our story, at the end of everyone's story, is this same Jesus This same Jesus who says at the end of our story, no matter how difficult and rough and messy it may have been from beginning to end, is this Jesus who says these words, "Behold, I am the one who is making all things new." Church, that's not just a promise for our end. That's a promise for today, for tonight as well. Newness can be messy. The prophet said it a long time ago. "See, I am doing a new thing," God says. "It's happening all around you. Just look, and you will see it. I am making a way in your wilderness, and I am making streams in the wastelands of life." And so when I see this baby Jesus in the manger, I'm reminded God is at home with us, wherever that is, even in the midst of our sometimes messy lives. He's there, and he's always inviting us to something better. I hope you see it. I hope to see you soon. Merry Christmas.